We do allow for questioning here at the Independent Reformed Bible Church. Does anyone have a question? We have a microphone. Just wait for that microphone if you have a question or comment following the service this morning. I have one right here.
What would be your recommendation for you finding one in your congregation or leadership?
Yeah, we're going to deal with that more next week. Did you hear the question, what's your recommendation when you find one? Because actually Jude and John both deal with that more directly. So next week we're going to deal with that very directly. What do you do with it? Just as a short answer, John was willing to throw them out because he understood the danger they were to everyone else. Paul says the same thing. He says, a heretic or a divisive man, after the first or second admonition, reject him. Now, this goes against nearly everything we're being taught nowadays. We'll talk about that more directly. We'll also talk about this problem that showed up in the Reformation. Because as I study the life of the reformer Pierre V. Ray, he ran into this. Because what was happening, the authorities, the civil authorities were telling him that he could not exercise church discipline. That the way to win people back over was to allow them to continue to partake of the Lord's Supper, and the Lord's table, and the leaven of the church. He was saying they're wolves. They'll destroy the flock. And at some point he had to go up against the civil authorities, and did. And got thrown out of the country for it. This is a big deal here. But the civil authorities have the view of many people that, hey, just leave them in. Just let it go. Show them love, and they'll come around. We'll talk more about that next week, and I'll give an example from his experience there. And what I think we fail to see is the way to show love at times is to say, no, you can't come to this church. That's why I'm never in favor of a sign out front that says everyone welcome. Everyone not welcome. Or not everyone welcome, if you will. You're a wolf, not welcome. We can do without you. Find another flock. Talk more about that next week. Who has the next question? Yes.
So is it ever okay for a pastor to get paid? This for staff? Sure.
And Paul is clear on that it is okay. It clearly is. But what's your real motivation? Maybe about a year and a half ago, this was kind of an amazing thing to me. I was looking at how churches gain pastors, how they do that. You're a church, and a pastor, how do you go out and get one? And we know how they do it. Come in, preach a sermon. If you like your sermon, maybe we'll consider it. And I don't have to argue that really flies in the face of what Paul presented here in Ephesians chapter 20. He didn't say one time, I came among you guys for 3 years, I've been a good preacher. Instead, he said, you saw what my life was like very close. He didn't say I was a good preacher. He said, I declare to you the whole counsel of God. Kind of hard to tell that in just a couple of sermons. It's kind of difficult to tell that. Paul's very clear that those who labor spiritually are worthy of remuneration, if you will, if I didn't know how to say that correctly. Is that the way to say that? Yeah, in dollars and cents or shekels or whatever they used back then. But here's the thing, I know some cases where pastors have ministered, they've had churches, they've done the things they're supposed to do, married people, baptized people, buried them, whatever. And then when they weren't getting paid anymore, they said, you know what, I've done my thing, I'm done. And they refused to meet the needs of the flock. Tim, I really got to ask if they were, what they were doing the whole time. Because it sure looks like they were a hireling. You mean I'm only gonna minister when I'm getting paid? That's it? It's not good. It's not good at all. You know, I wish we could, and I believe this is the way Paul talks in Titus and Timothy about raising up elders. And when Paul talks in Timothy and Titus about raising up elders, he's talking about people who are already ministering to their family and to others. They have to have a good reputation outside. They're already doing it, they're not getting paid. And it seems to me you better not touch anyone who's not doing it for money already. Does that help forward? We have a question right over here.
Said in the 21st century that we live in, there's many of them. Could you think of any on the top of your head? Give us some names, or is that not appropriate to mention names?
You know how that works. It works in the black and white area, it doesn't work in the gray area. I mean, there's some names I can name right now, but I was going to say, yeah. There's some other names that you're not going to be yeah so much about. I'll answer it this way. And some of you that I've spoken with know about this already, but I'll just do this briefly. There is well, I'll back up a little bit. Spurgeon. Spurgeon named names. And he printed his sermons also, which is like a double whammy. And he named names. And he basically got thrown out of his ministry. I don't think it hurt his ministry, it might have helped him. The problem with naming names is, as I've seen it, and I'd be happy to do it, except that if you name the wrong name, then no one will hear another word I say the rest of this day, and maybe for the rest of my life. There are some guys who get away with it. David Martin Lloyd-Jones, a godly pastor, he's dead now. If you ever get a chance to read his stuff, how many of you know of him, David Martin Lloyd-Jones? Godly man. How about it? Thorough scholar. I don't know how he got away with it, but he named the name that you're not allowed to name. Now, what name is that in North America? There's one name that you're not allowed to name. That would be Billy Graham. You'll name that name. You know? David Martin Lloyd-Jones did. And I don't know if that hurt his ministry or not. He was all the way over in England. But I'll say this. If we can't name names, if we never name names, then at some point we are failing in our ministry. If we can't ever say anything. Question for you. Did Paul name names? You bet. 1 Timothy 1, the end of it. Of whom are Hymenaeus and Alexander, who I have delivered to Satan that they might learn not to blaspheme. Naming names. He did it. I don't think he did all the time, he did it sometime. So I can name the easy ones. We know who they are. Can't name them all. We don't know them all. And I can't see them closely enough. But as we looked at it last week, I'll tell you what, Ray. I think Paul is painting a picture, especially in Ephesians 20, that if you don't declare the whole counsel of God, you're leading people astray, and you're going to be guilty of the blood of the innocents. And then one more thing about that too. I want to follow up on that. John is going to be teaching a little bit later on well, put it this way. I'll say it this way. We're crazy in this church. We're doing it all wrong. And maybe one day we'll figure out why we're doing it wrong, why we're crazy. But John opened up the law last week in our teaching time. We're going to be doing that a lot more. We're going to be embracing the difficult passages. When I'm finished with this section here, after next week I'm going to be preaching through 1 Corinthians, which is, to me, a very difficult book. And so what we're trying to do here at Independence Reformed Bible Church, instead of running away from the tough passages, we're going to run towards them. Which is scary. Because we all know the way to keep the church together is to run away from the tough stuff and never talk about it. It's scary, quite frankly. Especially 1 Corinthians. Because you can't just do the the head covering thing as that was a custom they had. Just move on. You can't do it. It's a tough passage. So we're not doing it right here. Maybe in 2 years, no one will agree anymore, and nobody will become the church anymore. I don't know. But I do know this: if we run away from any part of Scripture, any part of it, why should you come and listen? Who's another question?
Is it safe to say that one reason why it's tough to name names is because sometimes a person could have part of their message be true, but another part be not true. So if somebody that we respect, like yourself, would name somebody, we may quickly throw out everything that a person might say, as opposed to being careful to identify what part of their message may be error.
Appreciate that. I think that's well said. There are some people that, frankly, I have great respect for. And I feel that they just have a few things that I disagree with them and that are wrong. But if I stood up and said, well, hey, this so-and-so's got this wrong, it's really easy to just kind of like blow them off, right? And that's the end of that. Okay, yeah, I don't have to listen to that guy anymore. Where Paul did not name names, interestingly, I always found this intriguing. There's a time when he could have named names and he didn't. Anybody know what I'm thinking of? Yeah, I know inside my brain. There's a time when it was perfect to name names. Can anybody think of it? See if we can find it quickly while you're thinking. Okay, Philippians chapter 1 and verse 12. But I want you to know, brother, that the things which have happened to me in jail have actually turned out for the furtherance of the gospel, so that it has become evident to the whole palace guard and to all the rest that my chains are in Christ. And most of the brethren of the Lord, having become confident by my chains, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. Some indeed preach Christ even from envy and strife, and some from goodwill. The former preach Christ from selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing to add affliction to my chains. But the latter out of love, knowing that I am appointed for the defense of the gospel. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is preached. And in this I rejoice, yea, I will rejoice. I think that would have been a time to name a few names, if I'm Paul. There are some people out there preaching, and they're trying to make it worse for me. They're preaching the gospel, they're preaching truth, and they're trying to make it worse for me. That would have been the time to speak up, right? Fill in the blank. His initials are. It doesn't do it. Because I think Paul would actually rather have people hearing these people preach Christ than name their names and have them and turn them off. Does that make sense? What you're talking about? Paul cared about one thing. He really did. What a guy. He cared about Christ and the truth and the message. He didn't care how it got out there. Yes?
In Acts 20, verse 29, which you reference in the message, Paul says that, I know that after my departure, the fierce wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock. Then verse 30, and among your own selves will arise men speaking twisted things to draw away disciples after them. So both wolves coming in and false shepherds within the flock. Do you think that the wolves and those false shepherds ever kind of collaborate together and say, hey, let's take out this flock?
Yeah, it would be impossible to think that they don't collaborate, really. John 10 doesn't say it specifically, but it seems to me that after a while, this hireling going from flock to flock, you get to know the wolves. They sit down, they talk. They divide up the wolves among each other, greasing each other's palm. Why not? Why not? You know, it'd be hard enough to keep the wolves from outside, but boy, for Paul, you can see why he was so intense in this message. Because it's just not our nature to look out for wolves from among each other. We want to be nice. We all want to be nice. We want to be pleasant. Who wants to be known as the official wolf spotter in the congregation? I'll take that job. But he's very intense here. He really cares about the flock. And you see that coming through here. He cares. Wow. Thank you for your kind attention here this morning.